And this process, in the beginning, this crime, massive killing of Polish officers, was in the accusation. And this was the only moment when all these Nazis, who were going to be dead in a few months at the end of the process, they start laughing. They were laughing in the list that, because the main accuser was a Russian colonel who was accusing, collecting all this concentration camp, everything that was done by Nazis, but they placed in that as a German crime. And it was a strange moment during the Nuremberg process. And I remember reading about it. I was a teenager probably, so it was after the war, and I followed it quite with great interest. What happened at the end of the process, when accusation was made, and most of these guys, except this architect, like just few people stayed alive, most of them were hanged. At the end of the court decision, this crime was omitted. But in the documents of Nuremberg process, there is an accusation, and there is a punishment, and there is not one single moment that explains how come that one crime that was listed in detail in the beginning was not listed at the end. So, but I knew about it, like I learned about it, because I was curious about the crime. But then I had a feeling that, because this was done obviously not by Nazis, but it was done by people who were close to us. It was, Poles are Slavs and Russians are Slavs, so we are like kind of tribally, kind of same, how to call it, like very close nations. But actually, Poles being Catholics and being right-wingers, they were not liked much by Russians. And Russians, now in books you can find it. What happened is that actually these Poles, it was like several thousand, almost 20,000 Polish officers when Russia and Germany divided Poland. They ran not to be arrested by Nazis, they ran to Russia, so they were not prisoners of war. They were just Polish officers kept fed by Russians because they were emigres from, most of them were like emigres from the east.
Mark, this was not the question.
What?
We know all about
Kathleen
now.
Yeah.
She was asking how come that you took
this
material into sweet movie.
Yeah. No, so this was probably the greatest crime that I knew. I see a lot of criminal material in America. Everywhere when I was able to look in archives, they would look at all kind of materials. It was the most scandalous crime that I knew about. And of course I was waiting for the moment to plant it in some of my films. And I think that it was planted well.
More than
well, let's say, but it was planted to make people restless and to make people ask, why is it there? So I think that, I don't know, what was your reaction when you saw it? Did you know why was it in the film, or it was still mysterious for you?
Well, I haven't understood the film as a whole. I don't know if that is English.
Oh. So you didn't know why it was there?
I wouldn't be able to answer it.
No, but it's okay. No, you answered.
Well,
so there were many other things that you didn't understand also.
Yes, I think it's a very complicated, well, for me it was a complicated film, but I guess for me it wasn't so, let's say, shocking, because nowadays, especially after last year's catastrophe, the Polish president crashing, people know about Katyn, but then again, I knew in '74 it wasn't, nobody knew. But
it was most important historical secret that was kept for many years, and looking into it, when I tried to find some material, I found this document, a letter from the Polish, British ambassador to Poland. Poland was occupied, war is going on, battle between Nazis and Russians, and this crime was discovered, but there was a big silence among allies. But there was a letter from the British ambassador to Poland, who was also in London, because all Polish government was also emigre in London. But he wrote a letter to Churchill, and he wrote about this whole thing. He said, let us think of these films always.
Things.
Let us think of these things always and speak of them never. And I found this little brochure with this letter of British ambassador. So at the moment when this crime was discovered, immediately there was a decision on British side, and later it was kept by Americans and French. So this crime was never ever mentioned by any allies from the Second World War. So these people who are like fathers of some families and some decent people, they were just soldiers, they were not criminal people. It was a big crime committed and hermetically removed from the public opinion in Europe or in the world. So I, as a filmmaker, I knew that there is this kind of explosive material that should be published. So when I got a chance, I was making a film that was crazy enough. So sometimes this material in the film comes almost as a relief. You see Otto Mills' Commune, that is totally wild and horrible. And I was not pleased with a lot of things I got with Otto Mill, but I was not allowed to make another separate documentary. So I told the producer, look, if you don't let me do a documentary about Otto Mill, and I liberate the film from some ugly stuff, then I have to put it in this film. I cannot shoot something so scandalous and not show. And the producer told me, no, you have only one feature film to do. So then I got this Otto Mills kraval, how you call it, you know, like horrible stuff. And to balance it, I needed something as scandalous or shocking. And suddenly I realized that actually cartoon material was very shocking, but totally different from whatever Otto Mill did, without respect to life, to blood, to children, to decent decency. And it was like produced by this Austrian group. I got suddenly these dead Polish officers that balanced in the editing. They were, for me, because these children in the film, they get seduced by this woman who was running this boat. And to balance these children that get eaten by this, how to call it, witch. This witch, these children get eaten, alive or whatever, balance to it was the Polish officers, who were also children of one nation, eaten by some bad witches and totally being neglected.
So, for all those who haven't seen the film that we're talking about, it's Sweet movie. It's the first fully international film that Mr. Makavejev made in the early 70s, and it's shown here on Sunday, the 12th. And I think there's only one screening of it.
No, there's also one next Sunday, 6th.
So 2 screenings, and it's really worth watching that film, which is perhaps also not only one of the most controversial, but also one of the most beautiful films you ever made.
Maybe ugly. So for some people are really shocked. So I'm not really recommending it to people who are not getting recommendation from somebody whom they rely to. Because there are lots of people who are telling me, oh, somebody told me I have to see it. And because there are some stuff, heavy stuff there that I kept it there because I could not throw it out. Out of respect for what camera did and what people did. Okay.
So, you decide if you want to see it or not.
Speaking of the most successful international film, strangely enough, this film became very international. It was made for local public in Belgrade, and we got this lot of public. But this film really played in many countries, and we didn't understand why was it playing, because it's a very poor film. You know, you don't have many fantastic moments. It's like, you know, the Chinese strudel, you know. So it was quite surprising that it played in America, for example. So played in different countries. But then, you know, I was unaware that it was actually playing for its humor, not necessarily for its content. And maybe the content is quite primitive and naive. But actors were quite good and editing was okay. So I think a lot of people who worked in the film helped this film be all right.
Yeah, all the actors from Yugoslavia that we see in the films by Mr. Makavejev are actually either famous superstars from Yugoslavia or people who became really famous because they appeared in his films. But maybe we give the audiences again a chance to ask questions.
I'm the shoulder, yeah.
There is one.
Question number 2 after yesterday. Can you describe what is the role of the film critics in your work? Because in 1970 I was a strong film enthusiast. I was reading this French professional magazine, Le Cahier du Cinéma, and I can remember how often you were present in this magazine, how you were applauded with your films, and I think that the French film critics have enabled, a strong enabler of your work. I'm correct?
Yes, you're right. Because my first film was playing in a Critics' Week in Cannes, it was Meine Zotteberg. And then next year I was producing this film without any idea what to do with it, because we were still working on it. But a colleague of mine was having a film that was competing for the Cannes Festival. It was a film of gypsies.
I even met Happy Gypsies by Alexander Petrovich, which was the first film from Yugoslavia which won.
It was a big sensation in Cannes. And but the director of this film asked me, "Are you planning something with your film?" I said, "I have no idea." And he thought that I was illegally trying to push my film to Cannes, and then to kind of save himself from the competition, he said, "No, look, but why don't you send your film to Critics' Week? Critics love you." I said, "But Critics' Week is just for the first film." He says, "No, it's for the first and the second film." He said, "Okay, but I had the first film, I can't push down my second film." And suddenly they grabbed the phone in the company and they called Paris and they said, "Look," they called Critics' Week. So there's a new film by Makavejev, it's a second film, would you accept it? They said, "Oh, we would like to see it." And suddenly they finished the film within 2 weeks and the film went to Cannes. And it happened that it played also in the Critics' Week, so because the first one, Meine Zotteberg, was very successful at the Critics' Week, so it means critics already loved me. Critics who love movies. Other critics who write for big papers didn't write about me after my first film. But because it's a Critics' Week, so when this film played in Critics' Week, these critics who already loved me, they told other critics. So we had, I remember, for the showing in Cannes, there were like 12 directors of different festivals that came to see this film. And Critics' Week was done like nothing. It's just midnight and it's just kind of leftovers. But suddenly we got all these directors of festivals. So the film was immediately selected for Montreal and then for New York. So we got all this selection of the film for the festival because of the critics. So I was a critic's darling, obviously, with that.
So I'm correct.
But I was a critic as a student and I really loved critics. And in the Yugoslavia, even when I was making my first and second feature film, I was sitting in the critics' lounge in the National Festival because I was writing about other films. So with critics I always felt better than with, let's say, people from big newspapers who are sometimes can be very, I don't know.
That's not true, but okay.
Yeah, okay, I was loved by them too. So. Sometimes, yeah, okay.